Adonai's perfect plan will prevail. Genesis chapter 20 verses 1 to 18. Isaiah chapter 61 verse 1 to 10. And Galatians chapter 3 verses 15 to 29. Introduction. Have you ever experienced a promise that you thought would never happen but happened? Now after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham went to Gerar, a Philistine city in what is today south-central Israel, with his wife Sarah. They met Abimelech the king of that place. And Abraham told him that Sarah was his sister, and that's the reason why the king took her. Why did Abraham do that? In verse 11, he reasoned to Abimelech that he thought the fear of Adonai was not in Gerar, and the people there might kill him because of Sarah. We can see here, on the edge of the birth of Isaac is put at risk, exchanged for personal protection of Abraham. But because of the grace and work of Adonai Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the promise of a son will continue and his perfect plan will prevail. How? Number 1. Through intervention. Verse 3, Adonai intervenes by telling Abimelech in a dream that he is a dead man because of Sarah, a man's wife whom he has taken. The promise of a seed to Abraham through his wife Sarah was in danger. That's why Adonai intervenes, because he is faithful to his promise and his plan cannot be twisted. Proverbs chapter 19 verse 21, many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Number 2. Through intercession. Verses 4 to 7 and verses 17 to 18. Abimelech insisted to Adonai that he did the thing because of his heart's integrity and the innocence of his hands. Adonai knew it, so he did not allow Abimelech to touch Sarah. Also, he told him to go to Abraham, whom Adonai considered as his prophet, so he could intercede for him in a prayer. After praying, Adonai healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants, and they bore children, and so Sarah's womb was to be opened as well. The promised son will be born soon. Abraham served as Adonai's intercessor for the king. He foreshadows Yeshua as our great intercessor. Romans chapter 8 verse 34, Yeshua is he who died, yes, rather who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who also intercedes for us. Number 3. Through indulgence. Verses 14 to 16. Adonai commanded Abimelech to restore Sarah so that he will not die. So he took sheep, oxen, and male and female servants, and he gave them to Abraham, and he restored Sarah. He told her that he gave Abraham 1,000 pieces of silver, which is a bride price that seeks to announce Sarah's purity. Abimelech's generosity also shows as a tribute to Adonai Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, who clean-handed him. In our Haftarah portion, Prophet Isaiah begins with the one who has the spirit of Adonai. For us to understand this better, we need to examine first Isaiah chapter 11 verses 1 to 2, which says, "Then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. The spirit of Adonai will rest on him, the spirit of wisdom and understanding, the spirit of counsel and strength, the spirit of knowledge and the fear of Adonai." From these verses, it is clear that the spirit of Adonai is to rest upon the Mashiach from Jesse. Matthew chapter 1 verses 1 to 6 and Revelations chapter 22 verse 16. Also the Hebrew word Mashiach means anointed one, which designates a flowing of oil to separate a person for particular task. The only one effective of this ministry that Isaiah identifies is Messiah Yeshua, and he fulfilled this in Luke chapter 4 verse 21. Upon reading the book of Isaiah in the synagogue on the Shabbat day. What are the ministries of Yeshua according to prophet Isaiah? First, he will preach good tidings, which means to proclaim the good news of salvation. Second, he will heal the broken-hearted, a heart that has been broken because of sin that keeps the person captive. Third, he will proclaim liberty to the captives, a proclamation of freedom for those who were in slavery be freed. In our apostolic portion, Paul uses 4 explanations about the unchanging promise of Adonai to Abraham. Number 1. He used the example of man's covenant which is confirmed. No one annuls or adds to it, so how much more a covenant made by a faithful God. No one can add to God's promise to Abraham. Verse 15. Number 2. He used to explain the seed of Abraham. By using seed and not seeds, he was pointing to Yeshua, the greatest descendants of Abraham, whom Adonai made his covenant promise. So for Paul, the law cannot change this covenant. Verse 16. Number 3. He used the time span of 430 years from the Abrahamic covenant and the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, so it had nothing to do with Abraham's justification. Verse 17. Number 4. He used the word inheritance and promise for us to understand that Adonai gave the inheritance to Abraham not because of the law, because if that's the case, it is no longer a promise. Justification by faith comes by promise and not by law. Verse 18. The connection of our parasha is about the continuation of Adonai's promise to Abraham. In Torah, Adonai intervenes through Abimelech's dream when the promised seed to Abraham through his wife was in danger. In Haftarah, the fulfillment of verses 1 and 2 happened when Yeshua, the seed of Abraham, read it inside the synagogue. Luke chapter 4 verses 17 to 21. In Apostolic, Paul uses the word seed, not seeds, in pointing to Yeshua as the seed of Abraham where the promises made. Back to my introduction. Adonai Yod He Vav He is sovereign and he is mighty to accomplish his plan. His timing is never too late or too early. We just have to trust and believe that his plan will prevail and cannot be thwarted. Psalm chapter 33 verse 11. The plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. Shabbat Shalom.